My name is Mark, and this is Buddhist Roundtable. And Panyabasa is going to be asking the group a question for discussion.
Yeah, I don't know if it's going to be actually in the form of a question or not, but it is something that's I consider to be significant and worthy of discussion. And that is that Buddhism began as possibly the most masculine spiritual system in existence. It was invented by men for men, and they were tough forest ascetics who avoided women like the plague. They didn't even touch women. And then somehow, over the centuries, especially upon arriving in the West, it has become very feminized to the point that it's become pretty much notorious for being for lack of better terms, like wimpy and gay. Whereas it's just just Buddhism in the West is people just think of it as just it's like Jewish lesbians are the teachers, and it's like all feelings and love and all this kind of stuff, and it's just kind of a bizarre situation, which is, I mean, it shouldn't be surprising considering the clown world that the West has become over the past several years, but still it's something that I think should be clarified, and maybe even maybe we could consider various ways of dealing with the situation. So that, I guess, is the question right there.
It's a big question.
Yeah. I mean, it's just strange that it even became that what was originally like a hyper masculine system has become hyper feminine almost.
Yeah, I mean, when I started my Zen journeys back in the mid '80s, there was still quite a bit of masculinity within Zen, at least. We were expected to sit long hours, without crying. We were expected to endure elements, and there was a lot of masculinity. It was not something to be ashamed of. It was something that we talked about. But I think what happened was that we were just being the men that were showing up to the Zen Center were weak men. These were men that did not have fathers when they grew up. These were men that did not play sports. These were men that never really. They looks like they were growing up with pretty much everything handed to them on a silver platter, or what you say, the silver spoon in their mouth sort of kids. And as time went on, a lot of the more harsh practices, a lot more of the very strenuous things that we would do in our Zen training, um, they complained about them and they didn't want to do them. So as the persons involved in the Zen Center saying, well, hey, we're getting complaints, but we want to, we want people to come and we want to be open to all. So a lot of these practices, a lot of these things that we were doing that were more masculine orientated were dropped. And I believe what ended up happening was that the weak men, or what you would call in Greece half men, just sort of dominated. And then later on, the more effeminate men started filtering in. And at that point, that was when I left. I decided I wanted no more of that.
Yeah, I think nowadays if a Zen master were to hit someone with a stick, he could get sued.
In a lot of the Zen centers, the kiosak, which is the stick, has been permanently retired. Because the students will complain or sue or call the cops.
Yeah, I mean, it's good. I mean, you can use the stick as a kind of filter. It's like that's one thing that I've often considered. I mean, there should be like not everybody who joins should be able to finish, sort of like military basic training. It's like you use it to separate the sheep from the goats a little bit. It's
Well,
Buddhism was never really intended for the weak.
yeah.
It was intended for the strong to get to use their strength to transcend
Yeah,
samsara.
but when that's all you have showing up as weak men, and you're poking them with a stick, and they basically look at you like, well, you go F off. I'm not coming back here again. Next thing you know, you're like going, gee, how am I going to pay the bills? How are we going to fund this thing? So I think that it became more of an issue within all of these Zen centers, and maybe most of the Western Dharma centers, was an issue of funding, because I don't think that manly men were showing up. I think all that was showing up was the weak men. And the men that did show up that were more manly, they took a look at the weak men and they just said, nah, this is too gay for me.
Yeah, I think a lot of it partly was just, I mean, Buddhism was brought to the West largely through the counterculture. I mean, it was like the beatniks at first who were still kind of masculine, and then it went into the hippie movement that was more heart oriented and, love, 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 and, um, the long hair and all that. And, uh, yeah, I think it was just sort of a steady downward
Well,
path.
I agree, because I talked to a lot of the beatniks that went into Zen. And yeah, there was a lot of love in Zen. In fact, there was very much a lot of love between men and women in Zen. And that created its own problems over time. But what really started to end up happening, though, was the love between men and women started to be, well, if men and women can have love for each other, then what about men for men and women for women having love for each other? And as of course, with the culture of inclusion and diversity and equality, you get this, well, I guess we're going to accept that too. So it was more or less let in the door. And that's when I think we started seeing a big change within these effeminate men, but also the more or less turning a blind eye to the kind of sexual practices that these men would engage in, and just, like I said, turning a blind eye to it.
Yeah, there's some people on the Discord server associated with my Subscribe Star channel that have been talking a lot about this, and uh, there was they said that there was one person who wanted to know what the Buddhist attitude towards homosexuality would be, and so he was looking online, and really all he could find was academic papers talking about how the Buddha was pro-gay, or at least accepting of gayness. Like Western, like Abrahamic religions, like the Bible, the New Testament says homosexuality is abomination, and the Old Testament just says you should just take them out and kill them. Whereas Buddhism, it's more shades of gray. It's more ambivalent. It's not just you're going to heaven or you're going to hell. It's a matter of mental states and so forth. So, yeah, there has been a lot of interest in the subject, and in a way, it's kind of, um, I mean, it's gayness or homosexuality and masculinity should not be confused, because there are some gay guys that are just hyper masculine. Like the guy who wrote Fight Club. I mean, he wasn't like a twink. He wasn't an effeminate guy. He was a tough homosexual guy, and I've read that some homosexuals, it's just that. They're just hypersexual, and women. One reason why they have so much sex, they go into like the anonymous orgies and so forth. Some of them is that women are sort of like traditionally the break. They're the one that have more modesty and kind of slow things down, whereas men, some of them, they just don't have any use for the slowing down, and so they just go for it with each other. So there is some complication. I think I've also read, like in ancient times, there was really no concept of homosexuality. It was like in ancient Rome, it was just like so long as you were on top, you were still masculine. So there's all these complications, and people just keep asking. It's like, what about this or what about that? And from the Buddhist point of view, or at least the Theravada point of Buddhism, primarily your mental states while you're doing something that determines the moral quality of it. It's not just this physical action is wrong. It can be against the rules. It can be against a precept. But yeah, I'm just kind of muddying the waters here by sort of trying to differentiate like weakness and like effeminacy on the one hand, and just homosexuality on the other. Even though there's quite a lot of overlap, it's not really the same issue.
Well, from what I can only discern from my own readings and my own take is that Buddhism is not against the homosexual. A person can be a homosexual and be in the sangha. What seems to be Buddhism does not permit is any form of sodomy. And that's something.
It's not just that. It's sorry to interject, if I may. It's not just that. I think what's happening here is that there's been a disconnect with what Buddha taught and why Buddha created a sangha and why the practice is born, as opposed to just normal life. And there's a disconnect because the Buddha gave out the 5 precepts, the 8 precepts, the 10 precepts, the 227 precepts, and the 367. Is it 367 for the nuns? 227 for the monks. Is it 367 or 347 for nuns? Oh, my bad.
Know. But altogether, there's probably 2,000 or 3,000.
Yeah, but anyway, the point is that as you progress in spirituality, right, in Buddhism, as you get more tougher with yourself, the idea is to cut away, to eventually you actually abstain from any sexual activity at all. I mean, that's what monks are supposed to do, and nuns. We're not supposed to have any sexual activity at all, like nothing, zero.
Yeah, you're not even supposed to look deeply into a woman's eyes.
Yeah,
even that.
So basically but that has a purpose. It's not because women are evil. It's not because sex is evil. It's not because being sexual is wrong. No, it's because there's a purpose to this. Because if you want to meditate for 12 hours a day and you want to do it consistently over a long period of time, and you want to develop concentration to a very profound level, you want to develop your mental awareness to a profound level. So you have to eat less. You can't be watching TV. You can't be hanging out with women or men or whatever your persuasion is. You can't be getting involved in any of that because it'll distract you from sitting and walking and being here and being focused on the practice itself. And so there's this being disconnect now. They want to make the practice equal, but this is where it becomes really confusing and sort of moot, because the practice is not about equality. The practice is about understanding your own nature and cutting away distractions completely. In fact, this whole identity thing that exists in the normal world with pronouns, male, female, all those kind of things. Well, when you come to Chitta, there is no identity there, because our previous life, we could have been a woman, could have been a cat, a dog, we could have been a deva in heaven, we could have been in the hell realm, we could have been a spirit, we could have been a freaking fish, who knows? And in our next life, who knows if I'm talking in the normal sense, not hopefully in the Buddhist goal, we're talking about not being reborn, but if you're a Puthujjana, just a run-of-the-mill person, well, next life you might be reborn as the opposite sex, or you might be reborn as anything. So if we look at that possibility, keep that possibility in the background. So, but in practice, it's moot, because you're trying to go beyond the 6 senses. You're actually trying to go beyond male and female. Even at high levels of heaven, in certain levels of heaven, it's not male and female anymore. There's the formless realm. There's the form realm. There's the sensual realm where there's still the sexes, but the form realm doesn't really have sex. There's not really a sex. And in the formless realm, even more, like pure consciousness, there's no sexuality there at all, which we call the 8th jhana, right? So in the high realms of concentration, like if you go into the upper jhanas, or you go into even the 4th jhana, if you want to be. I'm not saying I've got jhana. I'm just talking like textbook, right? So if you go in the fourth jhana, the mind becomes steady, becomes equanimous. See, when the mind becomes equanimous, it doesn't attach to this or that. It doesn't have bias for anything, not even sexuality, nothing. And it's in that state, that is the preferred state to then focus on your mindfulness to generate satipanya, right? Which is mindfulness plus wisdom, or, to go, to focus on Dharma. See, so you can hear Dharma, because your mind is in a very equanimous state. It's in equilibrium. It's not sticking to this, sticking to that. It's not wanting this and wanting that. It's not distracted. It's quite. It's just kind of merged together. It's converged into one kind of point, you could say, for lack of better terms. And at that point, the mind is in its fullest capacity to understand, to penetrate any subject, right? So that's what's mixed, is that we're trying to bring this whole worldly things into Buddhism, rather than realizing that Buddhism, the whole point of the practice is to understand yourself on a deep level and to transcend birth and death. These are big things. Like people just scoff at them and say, oh, no, these are big, big things. These are not small things, considering that we've been transmigrated, in the Buddha's words, we've been transmigrating for aeons. So to just come to this life and say, okay, I'm going to be enlightened, I'm just going to sit down for a few hours a day and I'm just going to think about it and that's it. No, it requires a staunch approach. It requires a lot of resources, a lot of focus to be able to do that. And so then the Buddha, for the first 20 years, there was no Vinaya. There was no rules. The Buddha didn't put any rules. And then Sariputta had a conversation with the Buddha. He said, don't you think we should be having rules, because people, and the Buddha said, the time will come when monks will start to get distracted. The time will come when monks will start to do things that are not in line with Dharma or whatever. There's a whole conversation about this. But the main thing is when monks become distracted or start to do immoral things, or they'll start giving way to their defilements. So then if you look at the history of how every rule was made, first something had to happen, then the Buddha made the rule, right? So there's the backstory to the rule, right? But this came 20 years later, okay? So the Buddha tried to keep the practice without, as far as I'm concerned, the Buddha tried to keep the practice without rules. But essentially, even Sariputta agreed that eventually rules had to be made. And those rules are for one reason. It's to cut off from the world, to cut off distraction as much as possible. And it's even difficult with 227 rules. It's even difficult, even then, to cut out distraction. It's tough, because the concept of realization of cessation of dukkha, or dukkha nirodha, that's very deep, that's very profound. It's not something that you can watch TV for a few hours and then I'll just focus on the third noble truth, or I'll meditate for half an hour and then go into the entertainment complex or whatever, and then I'll understand the Four Noble Truths. No, because it requires a profound effort, right? So this is the disconnect between laity and monkhood. There's this big disconnect, and equality and all these kind of things, they're moot when it comes into studying citta, where there is no identity. I mean, if we take the base of consciousness, for example, right, which is a state that we can enter, there is no female and male there. There is no pronouns. There is no race. There's no color. There's no identity at all, right? So that's reality. That's reality. That's actually how it is, right? It's our thinking processes in society and whatever everybody's gone through that form these ideas and perceptions. Now, the last thing I'll say on this, perceptions is another thing that is not understood by the lay people, and that perceptions are not self. They're not self. They're also dukkha, and they're impermanent. So the not self factor is not understood. That's not understood at all, because people think perceptions is me. It's how I should be. So if you say that, I'm going to be offended. or if you say that, I'm going to be happy, or you better respect me, etc., etc., etc. Not realizing that they're suffering dukkha because they're setting a condition, right? When they create identity, they set a condition, and that condition has expectations and generates a lot of suffering, a lot of pain, actually. It doesn't bring you to happiness. It actually traps you. Whereas the whole idea of Buddhism is to become totally open and expansive and go beyond, 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 to develop all your capabilities to full fruition, to develop all your parami, all your perfection, right? So that's what I believe is what's happening, is that you've got a lot of people coming to Buddhism, but they're not studying correctly what's going on. They're not being understood. And perhaps, like you said, Mark, there's a lot of people, teachers that run temples, and they're worried about the bills. So, and that has a worldly effect on the person running the temple. They have to go into the world and work out ways and tricks to pay the bills, right? But then can they cross over back into the discipline? And I would say no. Because that's very difficult to do, right? Maybe a special person can do it, but I don't think anybody can just do that. Thank you.
Yeah,
Well said.
What saying
Well said.
essentially boils down to is it takes strength and masculine virtues to really practice Dhamma correctly. Like austerity, like avoiding what you like, for example. That's austerity, and that's like a traditionally, stereotypically masculine virtue, which has been abandoned because masculinity has become demonized in the West, especially on the left, where most Western Buddhists are, at least most Western lay Buddhists. So, I mean, there has to be some sort of return to masculinity, at least the stereotypical masculine virtues of just like unflinching determination and fearlessness and austerity, this sort of thing, in order really for Dhamma practice to be effective. Other than that, I mean, it's just you're doing metta meditation and sending love to all beings, or at least pretending to in your imagination, and then you get up and you just go back to listening to music or watching TV or whatever.
I could comment that if I could cut in next. I was just talking on the theme of masculinity and Buddhism. Just two stories about 20 years ago. I was at a talk by Tai Situ Rinpoche. He's one of the four princes in the Kagyu lineage of Tibetan Buddhism. I started with them, and he was giving me a talk here in Vancouver. At least about 400 people in the audience, big talk, really impressive talk. And his first question had nothing to do with this talk. A gay guy puts up his hand, very assertive, and he asks a question about tantric sex and could his consort be a male? So he had a very forceful question, nothing to do with the lecture, and Tai Situ Rinpoche had to deal with that. Another story is before I ordained as a monk in Chiang Mai, Thailand, I was teaching English to the monks at Chulakorn University in Chiang Mai. And there was two monks there who were overtly gay. They were like a monk couple. And that was accepted because, Thai society, it can be somewhat effeminate. But to answer the issue, I'd say the sort of the root cause of this problem, I agree with Panabasa, it's a problem in the West, is that since the 1960s with the rise of feminism, I feel the evidence is that the globalists feel in order to take over the world, one of the biggest obstacles is the straight white male. They've got to take down the straight white male. So there is a policy from the top down that we've got to promote the idea of being more effeminate. Homosexuality was promoted more since the early 1970s. So this is a top-down agenda throughout the world and Western society. And they've captured Buddhist organizations in the West, these globalists, these organizations, these Marxists, whatever you want to call them, control Buddhism in the West. And that's, I think, a root cause of our problem.
So I think that I've often considered that one good way of promoting traditional Buddhism in the West would be like, I've mentioned this before, it'd be like through like meditation retreats in the forest, where you just go out into a forest, maybe even fast for a few days, and you sit alone and meditate, and then in the evening you sit around a campfire and have a Dhamma talk, that sort of thing. And there'd be like some of the old like monastic teachings with regard to how to overcome like fear, for example. You know, there's a famous sutta in the Majjhima Nikaya where the Buddha says if a monk experiences fear in the forest when he's practicing, he shouldn't change position until he has mastered the fear. So if you're like walking back and forth and you hear a twig snap and you start worrying, you know, what was that? Then you should just keep walking back and forth until you've mastered the fear, or you're sitting, or whatever it is you're doing. And that sort of thing, if it were brought more into Buddhism, rather than just the comfy meditation resorts, like Spirit Rock. I knew a guy who was friends with a woman who she looked after the retreatants at Spirit Rock, and she said it's just a nightmare because these people are going to a Dhamma, like presumably a meditation retreat, and they're complaining because the towels smell funny, or they're complaining because the pillowcases are too rough, or because there's the sound of some sort of compressor in the distance that's bugging them. You know, so they're just so fussy, you know, they want everything just luxurious and everything just perfectly nice so they can meditate, when really, I mean, you should be out there under a tree. I mean, just going with the ancient tradition, you're out there being bitten by insects that you're not even allowed to slap. And you just take it, you know, you just tough it out. You man up and you just sit there and continue meditating instead of the, you know, the multi-million-dollar luxury Dharma resorts, which are they're like the ideal, or like what people are trying, what the smaller Vipassana groups are trying to emulate. They're trying to emulate places like Spirit Rock, but you know, they talk about Jack Kornfield in these like quiet tones of awe, you know, as though he were an arahant or something. But it's just essentially like a hobby. I mean, if Dhamma becomes, you know, just sort of like this comfortable, non-threatening thing that you do just to be happy, feel good about yourself, then it's really more of a hobby than actual Dhamma, seems to me.
I have heard of places like that, and I did not know if they existed the way that you're describing them. I mean, it sounds like what I have heard is that people go to these retreat centers, or they go to these Dharma events, and they literally have geisha boys and geisha girls that are there, and that will pamper them and come to their bidding, and depending on who they are, and, you know, I guess how rich they are or how connected they are, depends on how many geisha boys and girls will attend them. And kind of what you're alluding to is that is sort of what is going on. And I'll admit, I've been out of the scene. I have not set foot in a Dharma center or Buddhist temple since 1997. So I don't know, but you tell me.
Yeah,
Well,
well,
let me
even
add to that.
sorry,
Let me add to that. Let me add to that. Like, there's nothing wrong with, as far as I'm concerned, right? You have to live your life. Every person has to live their life how they want and how they see it. I'm not the police. The Buddha's not a police. He's not a government. The sangha is not a government. It's not a policing structure. We don't go into people's homes and say, "Oh, you're drinking. Oh, you're having sex. Oh, you're having sex with the same pronoun. You're having sex." That's not our mission. That's not our purpose. Our purpose is that the purpose of Buddhism is, and the teaching of the Buddha, there's a sole purpose there. And there's a big miss here. There's a big lack of understanding of this, right? First of all. But having said that, like even this temple here where I'm in right now, there's a lesbian couple that manages it, but they don't behave in any way like they put their training first. Like, they're very staunch. They're very disciplined. They're very diligent. They do all their chores. They bow to the monks. They ask for Dharma talks. They're very well behaved, and they practice. And you can see them flourishing. And the monks don't say anything about it because they're allowed to live however they want to live. That's the other thing. Like, people can live how they want to live. The monks aren't going to judge you, but don't judge the training. That's the problem. The problem is there's too much criticism of the rules and not understanding just the basic tenets. The basic tenets of the Panchakanda, the 5 khandas being not self. There's not enough study in this. Even from a lot of feminist Buddhists, they're not studying this part. They're not understanding that even monks have to transcend that male. And I'm not talking about masculine. I'm not talking about masculinity. I'm talking about as in male, female sexuality. I'm talking about sexuality now, right? I'm not talking about masculine and feminine energies. And even then, though, you have to drop that as well at some extent. But the Buddha in so many discourses says, you do what needs to be done with manly effort. With manly effort, as Panno said. There's of how to deal with certain things. You need to, there's one you tolerate, one you avoid, one you confront, one you bear, one you stay silent to. But the tolerating one, for example, as Panno said, you tolerate the bugs, you tolerate the heat, you tolerate lack of water, you tolerate lack of food, you tolerate sickness, you tolerate your teeth falling out, you tolerate headaches, you tolerate bad people, you tolerate bad noises, you tolerate situations where they're undesirable. You tolerate them. You tolerate them. You bear down, and it's very interesting because Buddha always says, do what needs to be done with manly effort. So there is this factor that they require, and he's talking to the monks. He's talking that there is this manly, there's this manly, or I suppose it could be masculine. I'm not sure what the Pali word is. I think the Bodhi has, pardon?
Would it be virya?
Perhaps, I don't know. It's like in the suttas, and it always gets translated as manly effort. It could be masculine, I'm not sure. But in any case, though, Mahabua, right? Famous monk in our tradition, who was a direct disciple of Ajahn Mun, Acharya Mun, the legend. He would talk to the monks and he would say, you're all men first. You're all men. Remember that. You're all men. Everything you do, you need to put that manly effort into everything you do. He said there's a book on this, and there's a Dharma discourse where Mahabua goes deep into this. He goes, so what if you have to crap in a hole or pee in a hole? So what if you have to wipe your backside with leaves sometimes? So what if the food's dirty sometimes? If you're getting beaten by mosquitoes, if there's snakes in the area, there's tigers. We're talking at his time where they would go to the caves with tigers, not so much these days, right? But there's still parts of Thailand where you go and it's jungle and there's elephants and tigers and all kinds of snakes. And if you live in a jungle, the amount of insects is staggering. Like even in the forest, the amount of insects, the amount of vermin that's around, it's staggering. So this thing about, because we're not understanding that practice itself requires a great deal of effort and a great deal of focus, a great deal of putting things down, putting it down, putting rubbish down. In other words, cleansing the mind, purifying the mind, purifying the mind. And this is missed. This is missed big time. And some temples have become entertainment areas. And I know why. I'm not blaming them. I'm not picking on them. I understand that they've got to pay the bills. But in my case, if I ever started a temple and it turned into that, I'd just close it down. I'd shut it down. There's only so much you can allow, kind of that kind of like sitting on the edge, breaking the rules because you need to pay bills and all those kind of things. But at some point, if you're going into spreading and creating an environment which is not practice worthy, which is not engaged or aimed at the goal, then you're wasting your time. It's not Buddhism anymore. It's become something else. It's become a worldly thing. It's become cultural or an entertainment center. And unfortunately, over time, that has occurred in some temples and things like that.
Oh,
So
I
it
can
really
guarantee you
depends.
that is what Western Buddhism has become. They're entertainment centers,
Right.
spiritual entertainment.
Right. But in order to
Just
do
like
that,
a natural substitute for Xanax or whatever. Just people using it as stress relief and trying to feel better about themselves.
right. And then when monks actually put the foot down and try to say no, don't come dressed in short skirts, or don't come in without your shirt on, or dressed like this, bow to the monks, or be respectful. Please don't talk over a monk when he's giving a Dharma talk. Please sit on a lower platform. All these basic rules, which the Buddha set forth, right? They're not observed. Then all of a sudden, it just catapults even further disruption of the real practice. So in other words, like when there are monks who are standing up and saying, no, we can't do this and it shouldn't be done, and they get chastised and rubbished by the unwise, right? By the unwise. So there's this, this is part of being in samsara. This is part of the human condition anyway. But I would say the major disconnect to this effeminate and what's happening to Buddhism, I think Brian hit on it. There's this Marxism ideology. There's this anti-white ideology. There's this race baiting, identitarian kind of politics that are happening in the world. But if you come to Buddhism, I think the first step is people would probably need to study what the five khandhas are and start from there, but understand the Dharma of not self. And then from there you can start to understand that we're not here to play games, we're here to focus and to focus extremely, like intensely. We're not playing games. That's why we go forth. So that's not understood. Right? That's not understood. So, I think that, I've got nothing more to say on that. Can we hear from Joe and John on this a little bit?
Yeah, I could go ahead if he doesn't want to. I would say that the cart is before the horse, to use the old idiom, because what everybody does now is they look for a teacher and they say, aren't they lucky to have me as a student? It's not, aren't I lucky to have this person as a teacher, right? The teaching is not, it's not the focal point. And I think that you guys hit on it because you mentioned the 60s, is where a lot of that began. In the 60s, you started seeing this India revival, age of Aquarius, discussion that comes up. And indeed, someone mentioned Jewish women, and the Jews got into trouble more than once for having temple prostitutes, and doing things they weren't supposed to be doing. And they called it worshiping the Queen of Heaven. And so the Queen of Heaven had a way of inverting masculinity. Like it caused them to not be able to be warriors, not to be able to be strong, not to be able to be guardians of their faith. And so eventually in the Old Testament, Hezekiah comes in and says, we're destroying everything that looks at all feminine, which, they called it Asherah worship, which meant the Queen of Heaven or the Mother. We're going to just come through and we're just going to raise it because you guys can't handle this. So I think that what's happened is that those astrological ages, used to be about every 2,000 years, or prophetic age, if you prefer, is about how they rank. So you've had the age of, what we would call Aries, which is the Hebrew fire law. You got the age of Pisces, which is the mercy age, which is now starting to end. And then you've got Aquarius. And so everybody's trying to group up. They're trying to figure out how do we join, and what does it mean to have an identity, and what does it mean to, how are we going to congeal as a tribe, as a ethnicity, as a whatever the case may be. And the only answer people seem to come up with, as Brian pointed out, is the globalist sort of Luciferic agenda of, just totally invert everything, just throw it all upside down. And if you don't accept me, then I'm going to raise such a fit that you're going to wish that you had. And that's totally counter to all spiritual traditions, period. Because whatever it is that you want, odds are it's probably not quite right. And it's going to take a lot of going in and meditating and feeling and experiencing to understand your own self before you can even begin to do anything else. So that's my 2 cents.
So as I'm listening to you, I'll have to admit I'm part of the problem, according to what you're saying. I'm a liberal Western lay Buddhist, and I don't understand self. I have a weak mind. I'm studying this to try to improve myself, and I've always looked at this in terms of giving goodwill to everybody, and all inclusive. And so I'm very liberal in terms of social things and gay people and weak men and masculine, feminine. I feel my energy is kind of balanced. I don't have a particular masculine energy. So that's kind of the way I look at it, and that works for me. But I understand what Bhante is saying, that it is about, commitment and effort. And to me, it doesn't matter who you are or what sexual orientation or race or anything is, but you do have to have that effort, and that's what it I think ultimately comes down to. So that's the way I look at it.
Yeah.
I agree.
Yeah, it's I was remembering like when Joe was talking about how the students nowadays, they're the ones who are like being choosy about their teachers and think that, that they're really like hiring a teacher or something, and the teacher is supposed to work for them or something like that. That it reminded me of 2 things. One time, a woman who used to be a translator at what's the Dalai Lama's place in India, Dharamsala. She was a translator. She was teaching the monks there, and she said that what most Western people want when they go to see a teacher or a guru is for the teacher to just single them out and say, "You are the chosen one." But then there's also, I remember one of my favorite TV shows when I was a kid was Kung Fu, and how that began was you had these kids that wanted to become Shaolin monks, and so they had to wait outside the gate for it was like 3 days at least. It's in the blazing sun, the pouring down rain. They have to like stand there in an attitude of respect, and if some of the kids kind of wandered off into the shade, or they're playing and horsing around, they'd be told to go home. And it was only the ones that would stick through the whole several days of just standing there waiting outside the gate to show that they were worthy of actually becoming a disciple. And that's just totally gone. And there's one last thing I would say is that most spiritual systems, they start off strong and then get weak. Like Christianity in the West started off just like fanatically strong, and it stayed strong for quite a while up until modern times, and then it started tapering off. But Buddhism in the West, it pretty much started off weak. It seems to me it never really had a strong phase that I'm aware of.
If it did, it was very brief.
Yeah,
I would say that
Hey,
from what I'm hearing today,
try-
it's very weak out there, very weak practices, very weak Buddhism.
I'd like to comment on that because I started off with Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche, the Shambhala Center, and he kind of single-handedly brought Buddhism to America around 1973. He made it big, and his chief disciple, the Vajra regent, was gay. And although I thought he was a really good teacher, but Chogyam Trungpa was quite a liberal in terms of, weakness. It wasn't really tough practice. They're quite an indulgent sangha, bordering on orgiific. Yeah, so that was the beginning of Buddhism making it big in America in the early 70s.
Wow.
I was going to interject there to respond to I think it's John there in the lower left. I don't really see liberal, as being the problem per se. The whole thing from my perspective is, why are we defining our identities just by sexual desire? Like, why are we doing that? Because that's an aspect of existence, but it's not the be all end all of existence. As a matter of fact, it's
Yeah.
You know, as you go into those more refined states, you're experiencing all kinds of things that are different. So I know why it's done, in the sense that I understand why the world does it. I don't understand why it is, you know, unless it's a financial motivation, that temples choose to allow that discussion to occur.
There's also, I can answer that a little bit. There is a problem when your temple, right, is struggling financially and this and that, and there's certain people which donate to the temple. Now, ideally, the people that I donate to the temple should give it unconditionally, right? That's the ideal. I give you the money, you do whatever you want with it because I'm giving it to you. I'm not going to control what you do with that money or check it. Otherwise, you're not really giving the money, are you? You're giving it. You're giving it with conditions. You're not giving it. So you're half giving it, right? So normally, most people are like that. Like I would say, a good majority of people would give money with a condition, like they want to see that the money is going to what they want it to. But ideally, the highest part of generosity, the highest act, is to give. Like, you know, there's always the old teaching where, you know, if someone gives a very precious vase to the master and the master goes and throws it out and breaks it to test, you know, if the person actually gave them the vase or not, right? Like, so to see the reaction, because if you really gave that vase, I suppose is how you say it in America. In Australia, you would say vase. But, you know, and so you give something very precious, and then that person can just throw it away in the bin. And inside you, ideally should, you know, the highest practice is you just don't have any effect. It doesn't affect you at all. There's no reaction. It's just empty because you've given it away. You've absolved it. You've relinquished the item. You don't care what happens to it after that. And that's what the practice of why I tell people to practice generosity, because it leads to that. It leads to a lot of freedom and happiness. And it leads to a lot of things, actually. So anyway, most people don't give that way, right? So sometimes in some temples, from what I've heard and what I've seen, sometimes the big givers, they kind of start to, well, I'm giving you a lot of money, you know, so, you know, I think we should put a TV in this temple. And I think it would be a good idea on Sundays to have, you know, for this to happen, right? But I'm not saying they all have bad intentions. I'm not saying it happens always badly, or I'm not even saying it's good. I'm just saying sometimes this can occur, right? This can occur. It's possible for it to occur. And depending on the teacher or the person running the temple and how strong they are in the Buddhist practice themselves, like how, because see, there's this thing, right? In Thailand, they say, particularly the Kuba Ajahns, they say Kuba Ajahns mean Kuba, like the monk teacher, the one who's mastered, the one who's like a very senior monk, but it's not just seniority, it's that person has developed a lot of knowledge, you could say, a lot of wisdom, is practicing well. They're called Kuba Ajahns in Thailand. So the Kuba Ajahns say when you've developed a lot of perfections, when you've developed a lot of wisdom, when you've developed a lot of things, you have whatever you need will come to you. Whatever you need will come to you. You don't have to worry about anything, food, money, anything. Plus also there is that power within you. If your concentration is powerful enough, if your wisdom is developed enough, if a lot of your abilities have developed to capabilities in fullest degree, you can attract whatever you need. That's possible. That's possible. It's not impossible. But the person who's not practicing doesn't either understand it, does not accept it, does not see it, but cannot see it because that person has not reached that you could say that realization or that awareness or that capability. So there are people that go and start temples that have not attained these capabilities, and those that have attained. So so these temples run very different. These kind of training institutions run completely different. They run differently. It's a whole different system. Like, for example, I know one good teacher in Chiang Mai. He goes armed around with the monks. He comes back At 8 a.m. every day, he shuts down the temple. He doesn't let any lay people in all day. Yet, for the last 20 years, they've always had enough. They've always got enough food. There's always enough money to pay for bills. They've got enough. He's got so much support because he runs the practice that way that he doesn't worry about anything. And so, but there are temples like this. Now there's these other temples. Now I've gone to one degree. I'll go to the other extreme where they just try to cater for everything. They'll have little markets in the temple selling all kinds of Buddha stuff and all this kind of stuff. They'll have people can play music. It's all very relaxed. People can walk around because they're trying to appease the people, this and that. And that's the other extreme. But it's hard to judge where the teacher's at. Like the second last thing I'll say is there was a monk that I heard at a Dharma talk once. It was a senior monk who was talking about, I was getting really angry with these lay people and monks making these little talisman of the Buddha and certain monks and selling them, And then I realized something in myself. This is his own words, right? I'll see if I can get as accurate as possible. I don't want to mislead. But he said, then I thought of the Buddha's compassion and I thought, well, you know what? If this person's making a living out of it and paying their bills and feeding their family, I think the Buddha would be okay with that. So that's an interesting perspective on this, which kind of twisted my mind a little bit, but it gave me an interesting perspective. Last point I wanted to make on this, the last conversation I had he was a senior German monk. He was in Maha Nikaya, but he wasn't of the Ajahn Chah tradition. He died a few years ago. He was a senior German monk, and he spent a lot of time in Thailand. He was many reigns. I think he was over 50 reigns. Anyway, I went to see him one day because I found out he wasn't well. So I went to see him, and I talked to him, and he said to me something just out of the blue, which was very, very interesting. He said to me, choose well. Choose your teacher well. Choose your teacher well, like really choose well. And that's all he said. And he said, all right, I've got no more time. And he just let me go. And this was at a time where in my monk life, I was going through some heavy karmas or whatever, just a heavy time. And that actually helped me quite a lot. So, I mean, it's complicated, this whole choose well, but, to finish on this, John, sexuality, being liberal and all those things has nothing to do with Buddhism because, like you said, because the goal, this is where the disconnection, this is a prime example of where a disconnection is at, because someone like yourself would go to a temple and try and will not adapt. I'm not saying you, John, because you do, but you will not adapt to understanding that the practice has a purpose and there's a discipline involved. So you're apt to attack it or criticize it or try to break it down because it doesn't suit your worldly philosophy, right? That's the danger. Where people aren't changing gears when they enter a temple and they're around sangha or they're around lay people who are seriously practicing, they can't change gears because they don't understand the teaching and what the focus of Buddhism actually is. The focus of Buddhism is not to be comfortable in the world. It's not to have sex with whoever you want. It's actually to understand that your perception is lying to you. How's that for a notion? That your own perception is lying to you because it's not self. It's impermanent. Perception is impermanent. It's dukkha. It's anatta, right? So your perception and even what you're feeling. Because my daughter's like, Dad, you're not paying attention to my feelings. And feelings are not self, Phoebe. But I have to go into a whole rigmarole there because she's not really Buddhist, and I don't force it upon her. But these are the concepts that are not understood when fresh laity come in, or with people who aren't staunchly devoted to the practice or understand it. And I think this is the major problem. Buddhism is not understood. Thanks.
I would agree that's my issue. Yes, I have a long way to go in understanding it deeper. So
I think most Buddhists, especially in the West, they're not so much trying to wake up as just trying to sleep more comfortably.
Yeah, you nailed it.
Yeah, well said, Pano.
But there are some good ones.
Yeah,
There are some
actually, yeah.
sincere.
Man, that's profound. Yeah, I think that's
Yeah,
right.
that's right.
I think that's absolutely right. I think what it is, you're coming to do. But again, there's nothing wrong with that. Like now, I'm talking compassionately. If you come to the temple because you want to give some food and feel good for a day, hey, nothing wrong with that. Nothing wrong with that. But what we're talking about is this attack on the discipline itself, which is a bigger issue, is what I'm talking about. This other one, if you're coming to the temple because you just want to feel good, well, I grant, I say that's okay. But to then criticize Buddhism because it's too strict or because it's not feminine enough or this kind of stuff, now that is where we go into a whole nother world of nonsense.
All right, we've been at this now for about an hour.
Right.
We'll go for final comments from Joe. Joe, any final comments?
Yeah, I would say that in the end, the biggest thing that I see with regards to all this is that when you take somebody who hasn't been through any spiritual training or tradition and you bring them into somebody that has, then the chances that that person's perception are going to anywhere be nearly the same as somebody who's been through training is almost zero. Not to say that it couldn't be the same, but it's probably not going to be. And so we have a situation, I think, where the blind, that are leading this discussion are coming in and they're having undue influence in many different ways, because it's like, cattle that are moving about that are causing the herd to do various things that are not necessarily desirable. And there are people that are shepherds of the flock, just by nature of how things are. And you want a sighted shepherd, not one that's going to lead you off a cliff. And so my final discussion would be, if you're throwing up whatever the issue is, if it's being homosexual, if it's being more feminine, whatever it is, then that may not be a clear perception to start with. As Bonte was saying, there's a very good chance that you're not seeing anywhere near right, to start with. And it's going to take you a long time before you do. And until you do, then your opinion doesn't really matter. I mean, it does, but not really, because you're not able to really interact with the dialogue fully. So that's what I would say.
All right, Brian, any final words?
Yeah, when I left the monk in 1996, I returned to Vancouver and I gave talks at the Insight Meditation Society. They never accepted me into their fold or their teacher training. And I realized about 12 years later, it's because I'm a straight white male.
All right, and Panabasa, any final words for tonight?
No, I think I've had my say. So yeah, I'm good.
And all right, and John, any final words?
Well, I would just say now I'm seeing that it really comes down to following the practice and being disciplined and right effort, right, Bhante? Having that right effort. And that's what, especially for someone like me who leads a busy life and a complicated life, that just have to put the effort in. So that's what I would say.
Right, and my final words, I'm going to echo with John, that we need to develop a strong practice to create the strong sangha, to create the environment in where we can truly obtain the Dharma. All right, well, thank you all for tonight. Really, another Buddhist Roundtable on the record. And thank you, Bhante, for a lot of good words from you.
Thank you, Panabasa.